Hey, my name is Proxy, and today we will be learning about history, everyone's favorite subject. Beginning with the first part, we have to go to the obvious spot, where history begins. That's right, it began in 1644. Probably. The difficult part about this is no one actually made any proper documentation about when history existed. So, it began now. And that is the logical conclusion to make. Also, Czechoslovakia is present at the start of history. It was there. It did some things, some other things. It conquered some countries, maybe. Some rats. They were around. They also conquered a few countries. Was a difficult maneuver, but they pulled it off. They were a lot bigger back then, but so were we. And the government. The government was there. Just around. No one had really done anything with it yet, but it existed. Now, before history began is when the real history begins. We have these ancient societies. And in ancient society, they were really old. Everyone was old from the moment they were born. It was wild. You have some murals over there? That's not an exaggeration. They were literally two-dimensional. Everyone in the past did not have depth perception because there was no depth. That's why all the paintings look weird. Colombia was one of the major players in the prehistory world, of course. It had, in fact, conquered all of the territory of Colombia, which is why they named themselves Colombia. Queen Elizabeth was also there, somehow or other. Still not entirely certain when, but since before history began was biology, I assume this is from the biological sector, as well as fungus. A lot of fungus, just growing on hair, growing on trees, growing on cows, growing on fleas. I mean, if you weren't fungus, what were you, am I right? So then began World War I, of course. The fungus versus Colombia. The fungus won, obviously, that's why Colombia doesn't exist today. And in Colombia's wake, lots of bugs. A whole lot of bugs, like an unreasonable, inordinate number of bugs. Every kind of bug you can think of. I can think of two kinds of bugs. Cockroaches and tigers. They also landed on the moon. This is the famous moon landing. It happened, it was real. It happened before history began, though, so it's not historically accurate. And Norte Chico was founded. They carved some terraces into the floor. Because before then, everyone just used ramps. They had legs. So they walked up steps. Now, agriculture in the prehistory world was great, alright? They had moss and cool moss. Now, the difference between moss and cool moss is less cool than cool moss. Cool moss is like a cool, 23 degrees Celsius. Moss is a good 24 degrees Celsius. There were also moose. They wandered around. They did things. They ate moss. Moss ate them. Happened, cycle of life. They grew antlers a while later. Or before. Depends what kind of moose you were. And of course, Sour Patch Kids candy. These were plants they grew on bushes and whatnot. Yeah, they had in many colors. They were chewable. They came out of boxes. They may or may not have been involved in the start of World War I earlier. But they were practically the most useless creature to ever exist. Now, in the seas, there was a whole nother level. Dolphins. They were like the smartest creatures around. They built entire empires, which worked great until they found out you couldn't use metallurgy underwater. So then they walked on land. That's how we got bears. Manatees were there too. They didn't learn to walk on land. Instead, they just learned how to swim. I mean, you'd think the dolphins would have learned how to swim, but they didn't. Yeah. Sour Patch Kids were also aquatic. The aquatic Sour Patch Kids were better. They were soggier, more disgusting looking. But when they got in the water and were in there for a long time, they actually started to expand. And over the course of a couple years, that's a human person. And that's how humans were made. The end. That's it. That's the end of history. Nothing else.